Hey everyone, welcome to the final thing for today. It's my fireside chat with Junpeng. We're going to talk today about how we support this many developers on a code base this big here at Meta. Hope we will learn something today. And Junpeng, how will you tell us about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Jim Pan. I'm an engineer at Meta. I've been Meta for almost 7 years. So I was in the Android dev team initially. We support build, CI, everything IDE. And now I'm mostly focused on the IDE side. I chose IDE side because I found myself most interested in the co-authoring space. I use Android Studio. I use VS Code even outside work. I use Emacs. I use Vim inside Emacs. So my daily job is so IDE is a very interesting intersection of many tools. My daily jobs, IDE build systems, source control, CI, everything related to monorepo that we support at Meta.
Okay, awesome, Junpeng. Sounds like you've got a lot to offer today. So, how about we start off? Can you tell us what a typical day is like for your average mobile developer at Meta?
Yeah, of course. So as an Android engineer at Meta, you get up and then you will just open your laptop and to do a pull to get latest commit. Of course, the because it's a huge monorepo, there's a lot of people committing to the same repo at the same time. So we actually will pull you to a good commit that is slightly below the trunk. Once you're in the good commit, you're going to do the project generation for your IDE. You're going to do a pre-build to warn your for the app that you want to work on. For example, you want to work on the Facebook app. You're going to generate a project for Facebook app, and then you're going to do a pre-build for the Facebook app to run the setup. So now that you run those commands, you'll be able to open your IDE. The IDE is Android Studio, by the way. Like most of the developers in the world, we use Android Studio here at Meta for Android development. And you're going to you open IDE, open this huge monorepo. Um, of course, we do something to make it work. So the slightly different than the outside is that you won't actually get the full view of the repo and when you open the Android Studio because our app is just too big. So as you open files, we'll dynamically load modules so that you can get IntelliSense for the IDE. Now you make some changes. You just do a bug build. So we don't actually use the IDE's built-in build. We don't use Gradle. We use our custom in-house build system called Bug2. So you run bug build and then bug install to see the changes on your either your emulator running on your local machine or you have a physical device for testing. Everything's good, then you're going to use your source control system that we have at Meta, which is called Sapling. I think we open source that. People, if you're interested, you can actually try it. It actually works on both Git and Mercurial. And then the sapling work with a virtual file system we have called EdenFS, which I think is also open sourced. So you use those file source control to commit your change, and then you submit your changes to web interface for review. You then there will be some CI jobs to maybe run some linters to flag you should not use some kind of method. Should be written in this way that would better. And there's maybe some feedback from reviewers. They're going to go through several iterations. For Android specifically, you may also see some tests. Maybe you make some UI changes. There may be some difference between screenshots that you want to change. You want to modify to make sure the test actually looks good. Now, everything is accepted. Then you're going to land your change. So that will go through a CI process. We have a very complicated CI system to figure out what things should be run to make sure this change is safe to land. Of course, that includes some trade-off. We can't literally run everything because the repo is just too big. So we have to figure out what's the best set to run in order for you to land the change. And then after your change is landed, because this is a huge monorepo, many people committing to the same repo at the same time, you may get conflict. So whatever commit on the latest, it may not work. So they will have a something called stable marking, which marks a good commit for you. This is what you will use next day when you get up. So when you do pull, you're going to pull the good commit and you start working again.
Okay, sounds complicated. We've got a ton of developers, right? We've got thousands of developers committing to the Android code base on a daily basis. Um, when landing a change, roughly off the top of your head, how many changes go into the Android code base on an hourly basis?
I think it's thousands. Depends. I mean, there's like hours, right? We have several offices. We have London, MPK, New York, and the business hour, the business hours are usually the MPK time when most people try to land things is going to be have a lot of CI capacity issues. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds rough. All right. So speaking of development and development environments, how do you think about and approach local development versus remote development here at Meta?
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic. We have been exploring both local and remote for years. Um, So for remote dev, there's some obvious advantages. As I just mentioned, you get up every day, you have to do pull, you have to do prior generation for your ID, you have to do pre-build. Maybe you also have to install the app from the stable commit, which takes time to prepare that. So when you have a remote development support, you can pre-run those commands before user access the remote dev. We save a lot of time, of course. And on the remote dev, you also have the advantage of more powerful machines and easier to manage because you can manage the environment whatever way you like. People have less customizations. However, there's a lot of challenges in remote development. For example, the ID support. We are talking about Android Studio, right? It's not as good as what we have seen in VS Code. But if we use VS Code doesn't have the powerful Java and Kotlin language features. So there's a lot of trade-off between remote and local. On the other hand, the downside of remote also comes with the you want to do we have the remote emulator support. So you can actually do changes by installing your app to a remote emulator. But that thing in practice doesn't work that great because you have the network delay of transferring, metering the content of emulator down to your local. And most people also prefer debugging on a physical device. Then you still have to transfer the app from the remote host to your local machine, which in our case could be pretty big for the debug builds. And it takes time. And also because of the network delay, the IDE runs on remote and the app runs on local. So you have this debugging. When you try to debug on your IDE, then you have the debugging delay, which in some cases, because our app is so huge and debugger is already pretty slow, and adding the network delay doesn't provide a good experience for the user. Now, on the other hand, in the past few years, we have seen big changes on the local side. For example, M series machines, I think is one of the biggest factors. At Meta, we try to put everyone onto the latest Mac OS for Android development. And because we found out that at least 50 or even 100% improvement for build speed and ID experiences. So this is huge. This is actually one of the biggest factors that local becomes much better in the past few years. And within Meta, we also have another game changer, which is Bug 2. So compared to Bug 1, the build system that we used before, Bug 2 is fully distributed for builds. It's remote first. So you can have as many powerful remote machines as you like to run all your builds. So your local machine is only required to host the bug daemon, and most actions will actually run on the remote machine. So you get the kind of benefit of remote dev with Bug2's remote execution model. But so right now we believe the local is still better in terms of because of Bug2 and the more powerful machines, and you have a native ID experience. However, I think remote is something that we want to explore because it has potential. It could be, once the ID integration becomes better, it still has a benefit of faster network speed because it's closer to our data centers. So I think it's an open question, but right now uh, for our team and for dev infra, we mostly focus on local development for the Android developers at Meta.
Okay. One of the nice things about Buck 2 as well is that it doesn't require each developer to build, even remotely, all of the artifacts. We were able to leverage, you know, other people's built artifacts and cache them and download them, right?
Yeah. So because the everyone is using remote workers, they're going to be cached as long as there's somebody already built it before. So we have the cache warmer jobs running on the stable marking process to pre-build the app for everyone. So you will get the benefit of cache. And Bug2 also doesn't download everything if it doesn't have to. It saves you some kind of the bandwidth. And yeah, it's Bug2 is one of the game changers that actually change the dynamics between local and remote.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds like a good mix of both, actually. All right. So, no discussion of anything related to development and engineering would be complete without AI these days. So, how do you use AI, or how do we Meta use AI in our development workflow today? And how do you see AI, integrating into our development workflow in the future, near future, midterm future, or long-term future?
Yeah, I think AI is one of the biggest thing happened in the past few years, and that impacts a lot, not just for the products, but also for developer product engineering work. For us, we kind of like many Meta tools, we have our in-house version of what people see outside Meta. For example, we have like outside Meta, people have Copilot for the inline code completions. We have our own version of that internally. We build integration for VS Code, for Android Studio, for all of our supported IDEs. And there's also things like we can generate code. You can just give some prompt as tell the AI what you want to do. It will actually generate the code based on the context, based on the file that you are in. Like the ChatGPT, we also have our internal version of ChatGPT that is based on our open sourced model. And the benefit of internal one is that it also learns from the internal wiki documentations. So because a lot of the tools at Meta are custom in-house, so you can't find any answers using any of the search engine outside or any of the chatbot available publicly. So we have those internal integrations allows you to actually search all the internal knowledge. And it actually works pretty well. People are using it every day for, this what does this method do? What does this class do? It will actually tell you exactly within this meta context what this will do. It help you understand code much better. You don't have to, when you get into an unfamiliar code base, it will let you get up to speed much faster. They also, I want to clarify. There's some what I mentioned here. Some of them are already in production. Some of them are still just some ideas, the work in progress. Um, the as I mentioned before, they also the code review process. They also actually AI integrations there to allow you to actually generate. You don't have to write your summary every time. You will read the code and try to generate what you tries to do. So it saves you time publishing the change and get reviewed. And maybe the linter.
All right. Wow. I'm still trying to figure out how to use AI in my daily job. One of these days, maybe my team will tell me. Um, anyways, it sounds like a lot of good stuff coming. Especially the fact that we can train these things on our internal source and our internal knowledge, I think is a huge, powerful tool we can leverage going into the future. Okay. So outside of AI, or maybe including AI, what would you say are like the biggest advancements to mobile development or Android development in the last 2 years? And what are you thinking will be the biggest advancements coming in the next couple of years for mobile development? And
Yeah, I
how will that
think
impact Meta?
yeah. I think my view may be different from folks outside of Meta, because we are a huge company. We have a huge repo. So for me personally, I think in the past 2 years for Meta, the biggest may be the Kotlin migration. I believe somebody talked about it earlier today or in the conference, how we do the Java to Kotlin conversion. And the language change shift from Java to Kotlin is really big. Developers, I think almost everyone likes the new language. And at the beginning, we didn't do the Kotlin migration like when Google announced official support because of many issues with build, with IDE, with CI. In the past 2 years, we did a huge migration from Java to Kotlin, and it improved the developer velocity a lot because Kotlin is just easier to write, easier to read, and faster to review and things like that. And we as the infra teams, we also made a lot of changes to make sure that we don't regress user experience. That includes build, that includes IDEs. There's a lot of work being done. And the other thing I think is bug 2. I already mentioned it before. It's a game changer in terms of local versus remote. And for Android, it's also the case. We have seen huge speed up compared to bug 1. I think it's at least 50-ish. Build speed improvement between compare bug 1 and bug 2. And then the other thing I want to mention is that we use the Android Studio from outside. So the IDE upgrade versions from JetBrains and Google actually brings a lot of nice features. Like there's some people within the company using Jetpack Compose, and being able to view those change live is very impactful. And also the IDE performance in general just gets a lot of improvements in the past few years. And
Okay.
now if outside Meta, I'll say AI. And AI is an ongoing thing. It impacted a lot in the past. I think it also has the biggest potential to change how our future Android development will look like. The the thing here is that I think for ID specifically, the current mental model is still based on the traditional idea of, I create a class, ID may provide some auto completions for things. But I think we have the opportunity in the next few years to change the mindset, to infuse AI into ID in a more seamless way. Maybe people will not start writing code like I need to find this class, I need to know the method, what the method do, but they going to more about what job. They're going to be more precise of describing what they want to do, and then AI probably do majority of the work, and people will do some fine tuning on top of what the code that AI generates. But then this kind of model or workflow isn't really that well supported, I think, within the current ID model. In the past, like when VS Code came out, it brought LSP, it brought remote dev, which is pretty big in this development area. I'm hoping to see something like that in the future that can infuse AI into this IDE or build or CI or any surfaces that can fundamentally change how we work as an engineer, as a developer for Android. Of course, I think, as I mentioned before, remote is still something that we want to explore. And in terms of the computation power, even though M series machines, have pretty powerful computation, CPUs and GPUs, I think like if we can have fully distributed source control, fully distributed build, fully distributed IDE, that will also change how we think about, especially how we support monorepo and meta. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. All right. So it sounds like there's a lot of different types of development going on at Meta, particularly, different ways people develop. And I'm wondering, actually, the audience is wondering, are there different challenges and demands and requirements for different types of developers? And I mean, not different types out of language, but I mean like different types of Android developers, like prod infra, product. And can you share some examples of what the differences might be and how you support them?
Yeah, we actually support a wide variety of developers. Actually, there's like majority of them are Android app developers, but actually some of them are also working on Android open source projects, and they have pretty different workflow because they don't use the Bug 2 as the build system. They use the vanilla that build system that comes with LSP. They also need with Flash devices. I'll more focus on the app developers. That's what the most audience that we support. So for app developers, there are actually, as Jason already mentioned, there are several different types of personas. There are developers who are like product info, who needs to work on across all the apps and change low methods they use in the lower stack of everything. And that those kind of developers, they need to have access to the whole code base. Right. And then there's also another type of engineer that mostly just work on the UI changes, the end user features. And for those developers, they don't have to have the view of everything. Even though we are in a huge monorepo, they just need a small part of the code base, and that'll work fine for them. And there's another type of engineer who kind of touches everything, right? They will work on mobile a bit, they will work on the backend side a bit, but maybe even work on iOS and Android at the same time. I think for those developers, we definitely see very different needs. For product and info, again, they need access to the whole code base. So we need to find a way, even though I mentioned it's it's gonna be very hard for the IDE to have access to the huge monorepo. But we are trying to figure out a way to let those developers being able to view everything from the IDE so that they can, do refactoring, do find usages to all kinds of things all kinds of magic that IDE provides and let them be productive. For those product engineers who mostly work on UI things, I think we also have the model that let them just load the things that they actually need. So don't have to be bothered by, I work on this feature, I don't have to see all the other code there. And for remote development, I think this is also an interesting topic here is that remote development works better, or the people who work on product info likes remote dev more because by nature they have to work on multiple apps. That means they have to maybe multitasking, and having access to multiple remote machines just enable that multitasking naturally and allows you to not worry about your local machine doing heavy builds, maybe draining your battery or something like that. Um, okay, again, then the other type that is like I touch everything, and those developers tend to not care about IDE that much. They could use VS Code, they could use remote dev, they could use local dev, whatever they like. They also tend to jump between different code bases. So yeah, that's how I would see uh, the needs from different developers. Um,
Yeah, it definitely sounds familiar. I know myself, I support a prod infra, low level infra mobile team, and the ability myself to even open up multiple instances of remote environment and make, like run 4, 5, 6 code mods at once. And then when they finish, commit and move on is super powerful. Something I've never been able to do outside of Meta. So that's a really awesome feature.
Yeah, it's all about trade-off because supporting those product info made us made us move towards one direction, and that direction might not work well with those developers who want to just see a small part of the code base. But again, this is spoiler alert. We are working together. I mean, we work together with Jason's team to figure out a way that we have the best of both worlds, and that is still in progress.
Yes, it is. It's going really well. Okay, so another audience question we have today is I know you're primarily on Android, but at least you probably understand what's going on iOS. Can you talk through a little bit of what the developer ecosystem on Android looks like and how it differs from the iOS developer ecosystem?
Yeah, I think for iOS is quite different. So iOS, for example, the IDE is S code. For Android, we have Android Studio. Their S code is not extensible, extensible by design. We have a lot of trouble getting the IDE to function well with our huge code base. And so there also I think we have some internal effort to bring some kind of maybe we can build iOS development co-authoring experience in VS Code that allow us to those iOS developers to have access to all the AI features that we just mentioned and all the source control features that VS Code already provides. So that's a huge difference between in the IDE side. For build, I think we all use like the same build system bug too. Although the macro layers are different, right? The way how we compile the code, Java Kotlin is significantly different than Swift or Objective-C. But from the high level, they actually looks pretty um, almost the same. And then I think we also have some cross-platform UI framework that works on both iOS and Android. You can do some server-side change that will automatically work on both iOS and Android.
Got it. Okay. So when you think about the different developer ecosystems and environments for iOS and Android, obviously there are constraints and limitations and differences in just, core functionality. But is there anything either from the iOS perspective or the Android perspective that, like each cohort kind of wishes they had, but the other one had? Is there any sort of, man, why can't we just have this on iOS, or why can't we just have what iOS has on Android?
Yeah, I think for iOS, although I mentioned Xcode kind of is not extensible, but once we make it work, especially the debugging part actually works very, very well. Like there are some developers who work on both Android and iOS. They actually work on the low level stuff, C code, and and most of the time, what I heard is they prefer debugging in Xcode versus Android Studio because that basically provides a better out of the box experience. On the other hand, because Xcode is not extensible, so people have to use some other IDE for VS Code. On the other hand, we can Android developers can still use what they are familiar with coming outside of Meta. That is Android Studio. That's the same IDE that we use every day, even you're not working in Meta. So you get the same familiar ID interface, even you're working at Meta or whether you're working at Meta or not, and you get all the nice features that we can only see in VS Code, not in Xcode, like AI infusion, all kinds of source control support, and remote development as well.
Okay. All right. So I think for our last question today, unless the audience has another one for us, I'd like to jump back a little bit to an earlier question. And you had mentioned in a few times measuring developer productivity and velocity and not regressing the experience. Can you just talk through a little bit of how in Dev Infra and DevX you actually do measure the developer velocity and productivity?
Yeah, good question. I think the from the high level, there's two big categories. One is user sentiment, another is the metrics that we actually actively tracking. So for user sentiment, we run a survey called the Very Experience Survey every quarter. We ask extensive questions on how your experience from source control to code review to IDE to build to everything. And we also host roundtables, like talking to developers directly. We also have our custom feedback group that people can post and complain to us. We gather those signals all together. And from the metrics side, we instrument because most of the tools are in-house, right? Custom built. So we are able to instrument most of the tools to understand, okay, for ID, we have, for example, ID freezes, how many user affected per day, how long is the freezes. And for build, we have build speed checking. You will be able to have a dashboard to debug your slow builds. And one interesting thing here is that we are trying to correlate the metric that we are checking back to the sentiment because this is important. We want to say, oh, we can actually use this metric. Oops. This metric can map to the user sentiment improvement because if we see an increase of, for example, users are more satisfied with Android development, we can actually see the metric increase or vice versa. So this is something that we are still trying actively exploring. We want to create some metric or a set of metric that can be used to map to the user sentiment that we have getting from the developer survey.
Okay. Sounds like a lot and very complicated. Mapping actual quantitative values to qualitative feedback. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think that's all we have for today's fireside chat. Junpeng, thank you so much. It's been enlightening. Always enjoy these chats. even outside of this room, you and I have talked a lot about this sort of stuff. So thank you for joining us today. And thank you for the audience for sticking with us and throwing some really good questions at us. That was really helpful. I hope you all learned something today, and feel free to keep asking, and we'll be here next time. Maybe next year we'll have one of these.